If you're watching this video and have not attended this session, be sure to scan the QR code, fill out the form to record your attendance.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Good afternoon. Today we'll be having the fourth session of our Security Plus study group. So we are still in domain 1. It's a bit of a long domain. And inshallah, this topic is a bit challenging, to be honest. There is one diagram in the slides that I need you guys to focus on. But this diagram will summarize everything, inshallah. So let's get into it. So this is what we will be covering in our fourth session today. What is zero trust and what are the control plane components and the data plane components. So the zero trust, it's composed of the control plane and the data plane, which we will also get into inshallah. Then I will summarize everything at the end, and then I have 5 knowledge check questions to test your understanding in this topic, inshallah. So this is for your reference here. This is where we are in the Security Plus Domain 1 objectives. Objective 1.2, summarizing fundamental security concepts. And this is what we will be covering today. As you can see, we have the control plane, which consists of 5, you can say like logical components. And we have the data plane, which consists of 3 logical components. We will cover everything, inshallah, in the following slides. So, what is zero trust? Do you guys know what is zero trust? Any ideas? Huh? Don't trust anyone. Yes, don't trust anyone. But in the context of cybersecurity, what do you guys think zero trust is? Giving the least privilege, yes, least privilege access. And also in the networking context, do you guys have any background? Like in networking, how do we use zero trust and all of that? No? Okay, that's fine. Because actually, zero trust is a security model, right? And it's mostly, it's not only specific to networking, but it's mostly used by companies when they design their networking, you can say like topology. They take zero trust into mind. So it's a security model based on strict identity verification for everyone and everything trying to connect to a network. So basically, you have a network, okay? And obviously, in this network, you have what is known as the, you can say the perimeter of the network. So this is your router and your firewall, right? So this is the edge of the network edge. And then you have your, you can say like hosts, computers that are inside the LAN, right? So in our traditional network, you can see here in this diagram, we have the remote attackers, right? Just a moment. So yeah, you have here your remote attackers, these guys over here. And basically, in a traditional network, you can see remote attackers, they can bypass the firewall. And when they bypass the firewall, when they're on a traditional network that's not using zero trust, they can easily, what we call, move laterally within the network, and they can move from host to host, right? Because actually, what is zero trust doing? In the second picture here, this compromised host cannot, for example, connect to the other servers, because we are constantly verifying the identity of that specific machine and that specific user. So that's why even when we, for example, when a remote attacker bypasses the firewall and goes to our network, he cannot move between the machines, because he cannot verify himself as a legitimate user. This is the concept of zero trust. Never trust, always verify. We are constantly verifying each connection that is made, right? But as you can see in the traditional network, Here you can move from here to here, and there is no constant authentication, right? خلاص. A traditional network assumes that everything that is inside the network is trusted by default, which is wrong, right? This is what companies used to do. They used to rely on traditional network, and they used to say, okay, since these guys are inside my network, I can trust them by default. It's called implicit trust, right? But in the zero trust, we assume that every single connection that is made inside our network or coming from outside our network is not trusted by default. That's the concept of zero trust. So I jumped ahead a bit, but let me go back to the introduction. So yeah, so like I said, we are verifying everyone and everything, trying to connect. And zero trust consists of four key principles. Never trust, always verify, where we basically authenticate all access attempts. Any access attempt coming from the internet to our LAN or any access attempts happening inside our local network, we will authenticate and verify every single connection, whether it is inbound or outbound, going outside the LAN or coming inside the local area network. Then we have least privilege access, right? So basically, you guys are familiar with least privilege access or not? Are you familiar with it? What is it? Yes. Yes, exactly. What you described is the need to know, right? So least privilege access, it consists of two things, need to know and need to use. So basically, what do we mean by need to know? Is that we only provide access to our employees, right? So let's say, for example, we have an employee who works in like HR. We only give him access to what he needs to know in order to do his job. This is what least privileged access is. And also, we only give him access to the company resources in order to use, right? So only give him access to the resources that he needs to use to perform his job. This is least privileged access. Multi-factor authentication, we touched on this in the last session, not last week, the week before, right? Where we covered the 5 authentication factors. Do you guys remember them or no? It's a bit of a revision from the last session. 5 authentication factors. Biometrics, physical, yes, yeah. Possession-based, yes. There's 3 more. Yes, location-based, yeah. Fingerprint is biometrics, yes. Something, yes. And there's one more. That's the credentials, yes. But there's one more. There's one more that you guys didn't say. And to be honest, it's a bit of a, it's not a common one, to be honest. But it's there. Behavioral access or behavioral authentication factor. Remember that example where, yes, exactly. Based on the user's typing speed, we can determine, yeah. So you guys remember that example. So yeah, so we can use multi-factor authentication, right? Which is knowledge, possession, biometrics, location, and behavioral. We combine all of these authentication factors to help us implement the zero trust model, right? And you will see further in the slides how we use multi-factor authentication to achieve this security model. And obviously, the fourth principle of zero trust is continuous monitoring. If you guys remember the logs that I talked about, how it's important to have security logs, right? So we implement this principle of continuous monitoring to log all of the user's actions and to analyze all of the network activity that is happening. This is how we determine if this user is trusted or not, right? Through the logs, through what he's doing, if it's malicious, if it's something out of the ordinary, right? This is how we use continuous monitoring. We will get into this in the next slides, inshallah. So this is an overview of zero trust, right? So we have 3, you can say, stages. So basically the first stage here we can say that we restrict remote access, or we set remote access. Oh my God, it's not a good drawing. Okay, but yeah, we set remote access based on the principle of least privilege, right? So let's say, for example, you are an employee, you are connecting to a company using a VPN, right? So the company provides you with a VPN to connect to the company resources from your home. Basically, we can implement the principle of least privilege on every single remote access connection. So when you want to access the company database, for example, we can configure principle of least privilege to check if you are authorized to access that company database or not. Are you part of the IT team? If yes, okay. If not, then the VPN connection will block your connection to the company database or whatever resource that is not authorized, right? So this is how we can control the remote access based on least principle of least privilege. Also, never trust automatically, right? Never trust automatically, and continuously verify user and digital device identities. So if you guys remember, also in the last session, I talked about how we can authenticate people and how we can authenticate systems, right? Authenticating people is using those 5 authentication factors that we discussed now, and continuously verifying digital device identities is using the digital certificate. Do you remember when I went to the UDST website and they showed you there was a digital certificate with a public key and the specific hash of that certificate? This is how we determine if servers are trusted, or if not just servers, but because also we can have digital certificates for our own computers also. We can have that. So we basically cannot trust anyone, and we verify using the you can select authentication of people and authentication of digital devices. And the last one, actually, the last stage is we assume all network traffic is, oh my God, is some sort of cyber attack, right? So just a moment, let me remove all of this. It's I'm still getting used to this, guys, so yani, don't make fun of me. Yani. Just a moment. Yeah, so assume all network traffic is part of a cyber attack. Basically, every single connection that comes into our network and every single connection that originates from our local area network can, or we as network security professional adopting the zero trust model, have to assume that all these connections are malicious by default, right? It's called, there's a concept in networking, it's called, I think it's called implicit deny. Yes, implicit deny, right? So basically we deny everything by default, and then we configure certain security policy rules to allow certain connections coming from certain IP addresses, coming from certain port numbers, right? So we have a implicit deny policy where we assume all traffic is malicious by default, and then when the device or when the user that is initiating that connection verifies himself and the digital device is also authenticated, here we can allow him access to the resource for every single connection that he makes. So I touched on this, right? You have the traditional network and the zero trust. Traditional network, everything inside the LAN is trusted. Zero trust network, everything inside the LAN is not trusted by default. And also everything that is coming from the internet to our LAN is also not trusted. Because actually in the, what do you call it? Traditional network, every connection that is made from the internet to the LAN is not trusted, but everything inside the LAN is trusted. But in the zero trust, actually nothing is trusted, either coming from the internet to the LAN or any connection that is made within our local area network. So yeah. Now let's go into the first logical component of zero trust, which is known as the control plane. Okay, so from the name control plane, what do you think this component is responsible for in the zero trust model? What do you think? Sorry? Permissions, you said. Right. Okay. So control plane from the name, right? Because we have control plane and data plane. So you're saying control plane is the one that dictates who will access the network, right? And you're correct, actually, yeah. So actually, what we do in the control plane is that we manage policies and access control rules, right? So in the control plane, this is where all of the policies are configured, right? Who is allowed access, from where he is allowed access, at what time of the day he is allowed to access, what resources, right? So the like authorization and authentication. So all of that is handled in the control plane. Control plane is the big boss of the zero trust model, right? It's where all of the access decisions are made, whether this certain user is allowed access or whether he's not allowed access. It's all made in the control plane. And also within the control plane, we have 4 components, like I mentioned earlier in the security objective. We have adaptive identity, threat scope reduction, policy-driven access control, and policy administrator and policy engine, right? So the last one is actually 2 things, policy administrator and policy engine. So it's really 5 components, if you count them. So yeah, let's get into each component and know exactly what they serve in terms of the control plane. Adaptive identity. Do you guys have any clue on what adaptive identity is? First of all, what does the word adaptive mean? When we say continuously changing, yes, yeah, continuously changing. So when we say adaptive identity, it's an identity that's continuously changing and that is dynamic, right? So basically, this is used in the zero trust model. And why do we use adaptive identity? Where basically, if a certain user or a certain device tries to, let's say, like authenticate from the USA, okay? Trying to authenticate here, for example, like here in Qatar, okay? Or trying to access a server here in Qatar. And we are actually, you can say, like anticipating this connection from the USA. This is not some sort of like malicious connection or something. Then we can certainly allow him access, right? If he meets all of the criteria. But let's say, for example, there is a malicious connection from North Korea, right? Basically, what is the role of adaptive identity is to look at from where this connection is coming from. So the physical location. So in this case, like North Korea, what is the device type, right? So is it Linux? Is it like Mac OS? What is the like device model? Is it an iPhone? Is it some sort of Dell desktop, right? And we're looking at from which network did this connection originate from, right? So in this case, it originated from some network in like North Korea. We don't know where it is, or we don't know which network exactly, but we know it came from North Korea, right? And basically, when we detect a unusual connection coming from North Korea, for example, adaptive identity will force that user to go through additional security checkpoints, right? So you can see here this specific example. If a user is accessing from an unusual location, like for example North Korea, additional verification steps are triggered, right? So if you are accessing from the USA, that's fine. Maybe there will be only one specific security check. Maybe you will be prompted to put your password, for example, only. But if the connection is originating from North Korea, for example, we will ask you to put your password, then we will ask you to go through additional measures. Maybe show us your digital certificate. Maybe you will receive a certain code on your phone, right? This is how we make the malicious user, or actually this is how we catch the malicious user off guard by making him go through multiple hoops based on where he's connecting from or what time. right? This is known as adaptive identity. It changes based on the context of the connection, is what I'm trying to get at here, right? So this is adaptive identity. I hope you guys understood. Do you have any questions about anything so far? Good. Okay. Threat scope reduction. So when we say threat scope, what do we mean exactly? Not really that, but when we say like scope, like threat scope, what are we? Sorry? How big the threat is? Yes, you are on the right track. Yeah, threat scope. Yeah. So basically, yeah. So you can see there's a word or there's two words: attack surface. So do you guys know what that is? Also, attack surface. Ah. So you guys are on the right track, yes. When you said how big the threat is, yes, you were on the right track also, and you also. So so when we say threat scope reduction, or specifically when we say the attack surface, what is the attack surface? The attack surface is basically how many entry points do I have in my network, right? Or how many, so basically how many entry points can we anticipate attacks from, right? So the lesser our attack surface is, the more secure we are, right? But it also means the less functionality we have, right? Because actually security and functionality do not go hand in hand. When we have a high level of security, let's say, for example, in a government network, we have very less functionality. We do not have the freedom to connect to anything that we want to connect to, right? So this is what we mean by minimizing the attack surface. We limit what resources a user can access, right? And like I said, the trade-off, there is always a specific trade-off between security and functionality. High security means low functionality. High functionality means low security, right? So these are polar opposite. And how do we minimize the attack surface? What are some examples of certain measures that we can take? So we can limit VPN access to specific systems or applications. Like I said in my previous example, when you're connecting to a company, to a company resource from your home, right? That specific VPN connection will allow you certain access to certain systems only, based on your role, right? So this is like one of the measures, and also we can perform something known as device whitelisting, right? If you guys remember IP whitelisting, we discussed this in the last session, right? So this is the same thing, but using devices. We are only restricting certain devices to connect to our network. This is known as device whitelisting. Only pre-approved secure devices to connect to the network. Now, obviously, don't forget, we are still talking about zero trust here, right? And this is all part of the control plane, right? And basically, these are the measures that are taken by the control plane, right? And by the policies dictated by the control plane to basically restrict who has access to what, right? And based on those policies, you will see later there is a specific component that enforces these policies. We will come to it in the next slides, inshallah. And the third example is we can also enforce strict endpoint security policies. Now, what do I mean by this? You guys know what a specific endpoint is, right? So endpoint can be a server, can be your laptop, can be your phone, right? These are all network endpoints, right? And we can have certain security policies, or we can force these endpoints to follow certain security policies. For example, we can have a laptop, right? And this laptop is, for example, provided by the company, right? And as part of the endpoint security policy, you have to update your antivirus weekly or daily or every 3 days, right? These are all known as endpoint security policies. And also, we can configure these endpoints to, for example, only connect to certain servers, right? Or disallow a certain web browsing, disallow certain website content, right? These are all endpoint security policies dictated by a certain organization, right? So this is an example of minimizing our attack surface. So by limiting VPN access and by only allowing pre-approved devices and by enforcing endpoint security, this is how we lessen our attack surface, meaning that any specific attacker does not have a lot of entry points into our network. Excellent. Right? So thank you so much. So moving on to the third component, which is policy-driven access control. So you guys know what policies are, right? We touched on it a couple of times, not only in the last session, in the previous session also. Sorry? Yes, yeah. In our first two sessions, yeah. So basically, when we say policy-driven access control, here we refer back to the authorization models that we talked about. You guys remember RBAC, ABAC, right? Context-based access control, discretionary access control, mandatory access control. This is what we refer to as policy-driven access control. We have certain policies created by an organization, and then we create access controls based on these policies, right? So access decisions are based on policies that define access rules, not just user permission. So actually, when we create these policies, not only are we assigning user permission, like for example, Ali, maybe he can only read write to a certain file, maybe he can read write and execute to another file, right? Not only are we defining these user permissions, but we are also defining what are the certain criteria that the user must meet to access the network, right? This known as access rules, right? And like I said here, we have role-based access control. And as we mentioned in the previous session, we have certain roles in the company. We assign certain permissions to those roles, and then we assign the user to the role, not to the permission, right? And then the user will inherit all of these permissions by default when he is assigned to the role. And also we have attribute-based access control, which I mentioned also. It's basically where we take into account multiple factors when it comes to access control. So the time of day, from where you are accessing, and what is your specific job title. Right? These are all criteria or certain components that are taken into account when we talk about ABAC. And the third one, which I also touched about in the previous session, contextual or risk-based access control. So you guys remember what this is, right? Based on the context of the connection. If there is a certain emergency in the company, if there is a certain disaster, we can allow temporary privileged access for some, maybe like IT guy, to fix that issue. Yes, exactly. Or maybe third-party company, because usually we don't allow third-party companies. Yeah. Usually we don't give them a lot of privilege, right? Third-party companies. But in this case, contextual or risk-based access control, we determine the risk of the situation, or how dangerous the situation is, or how risky a certain connection is. And then based on that, we determine if you're allowed to access a certain resource or a certain network. Right? This is contextual or risk-based access control. And I give here a simple example. A policy might allow access only during business hours or from certain network location. Right? This is actually related to attribute-based access control, this certain example here. Right? So we have two components. We have the business hours and we have from where you are connecting from. This is policy-driven access control. Because also remember, when you work for a company, and I have seen this firsthand, to be honest, in my previous internship, they make you read these policies, right? For example, what can you do in a network? what are the certain resources that you can access, and then based on these company policies, they will create the specific access control for the network, right? This is how companies operate. You have the policies, based on the policies, you create the access control. Yeah, and now we're moving on to the final component of the control plane, or actually the final two components of the control plane, which is policy administrator and policy engine, right? Now I need you guys to really make the distinction between these two, because these two can be a bit confusing, to be honest. For me, when I first studied this, I found it very hard to actually differentiate between them. Okay? So what do you guys think? Policy engine and policy administrator. Think of a normal administrator. What does he do? First of all, yeah. Yeah. Like, okay, if you are a network administrator, what are your daily tasks, for example? What do you do? Yani? Yeah. Yes, yeah.
I can be the one that makes the decisions and then the administrator who acts upon those decisions.
Perfect. Yes, exactly. The policy engine, from the name, right? When you think of an engine, you think of, like, something that powers the whole system, right? This is what we're talking. This is what we're talking about, and you were spot on, to be honest. Policy engine is the one that makes the decision, right? So, and how does it make this specific decision? Based on the policies that we discussed earlier. Based on the company policies, it evaluates the requests that are coming to the network, and then if these requests meet all of the policies dictated by the specific company, then we allow him access, right? This is what the policy engine does. It's responsible for making the decision, and whether we approve access or we, for example, like deny certain malicious access attempts. Policy administrator, right, like you said also, is what implements the decision that was dictated by the policy engine, right? This is where so the policy administrator will take the decision from the policy engine, and then it will implement, or it will enforce that decision on the specific connection, right? So, and also, it is also responsible for establishing or removing the session between the user and the resource. Because think of it this way, the policy engine makes the actual decision. That decision is passed down to the policy administrator, and then the policy administrator will look at the decision. Let's say that the specific decision is deny, for example, or drop. So it will straight away, it will close the connection between the user that is trying to access the specific company resource, right? So it's the one that is actually responsible for the session management based on the policy engine's decision. Okay, so as you can see here in this small diagram here, this is the control plane in a nutshell, what we talked about, right? We have the policy engine and we have the policy administrator. And actually, both of these two components are part of one larger component, which is known as the policy decision point, right? The policy engine, the one that makes the actual decisions, and the policy administrator, the one that implements and manages the actual session between the user and the resource, work together under the policy decision point, right? So don't get confused. If, for example, in the exam, you might have a question, what is the policy decision point? Or, the policy engine does this and the policy administrator does this. What does the policy decision point do? Well, they're just part of the policy decision point, right? They're two components within a larger component, basically. And you can see here, there are two arrows, right? This is what happens when they communicate with the data plane, which is what we'll see next now, right? And yeah, so basically, like I said here, policy decision point makes access decisions based on the policies defined in the policy engine. So the policies are actually all configured and defined in the policy engine, right? But the policy administrator is the one that enforces the policy engine's decision. Yeah. So moving on to the data plane. And when we say data plane, what do you guys think we're talking about here when we talk about data plane? Sorry? Who can read the data? Well, not necessarily. We have, okay, so look, we have the control plane, right? The brains. If we have the data plane, what does that mean? Data plane. The answer is in the word. Sorry? Yes. The simple inbound connections that are coming to our network and the simple outbound connections that are going out of our network. This is what's known as the data plane. It's the actual data flow, right? And basically, the data plane is like the, let's say, when you go to the airport and there are security checkpoints, that's the data plane, right? The data plane is the one that stops the connections, communicates with the control plane, gets the actual decision from the control plane, and then based on the control plane's decision, will act on that decision by either approving or denying, right? This is the role of the data plane. And we have three components within the data plane, which is implicit trust zones, subjects and systems, and we have policy enforcement points, right? These are the three components of the data plane. Let's get into each one, inshallah. Implicit trust zones. So when we say implicit trust zones, what do you think we're talking about here? In a way, yes, because what did we say about traditional networks? What do they do?
Where if you're connected in the local network, you're we automatically assume that you're trusted, while if you're trying to connect from outside the network, you're not automatically verified.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's perimeter-based security. That's for the traditional networks, right? Because they mostly implement security on the perimeter, but they don't really care about what's going on inside the network, like you said, right? So when we have when we say implicit, the word implicit means by default, right? Something that is done by default. So when we say implicit trust zones, basically we have trust zones set up in our zero trust model. Now hold on, I know you will find a contradiction in the statement, right? We have implicit trust zones, certain areas in the network that are trusted by default in a zero trust model. Okay, so when we were talking about the implicit trust zones, like I said, or as you said, that we have certain areas of the network that are trusted by default. And there is a contradiction in the statement where actually we have certain areas that are trusted by default in a zero trust architecture. Now, actually, how does this work? Right? Because we mentioned earlier that nothing in the zero trust model is trusted, right? So the reason why we do this is because we have certain areas in the network, right? Like, for example, let's say the corporate office, right? This is a specific network, right? So in the corporate office, think about it from a security point of view. In order to access this corporate office network, what do you have to do? You have to go into a building. You have to, the security guard must verify your identity. You must show a certain badge, right? You need to tap your badge to go into a certain room. You might have biometrics. You need to do all of that to access a corporate office network. Now, doesn't this mean that whoever gets to the corporate office network physically means that he's trusted? To a degree, right? So this is why we have implicit trust zones, right? We have, I know it defeats the purpose of zero trust, but we need these implicit trust zones to establish a sort of baseline right, of what areas in my network are implicitly trusted. Usually it will be the internal LAN, the corporate office, the data center. These are all implicitly trusted by default, So we can grant trust to these zones based on policies. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't control and monitor these zones, because, like we said, what is the greatest threat to our network? Is it internal threats or is it external threats? Internal threats.
Can cause more damage.
You can cause more damage, exactly. External threats, they have to, because usually all of our defenses, all of our network defenses, like intrusion prevention systems, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and all of the like edge routers, yeah, they're all protecting from malicious outside access, right? But when we have an insider threat, let's say a malicious employee who has just been fired and who wants to take revenge, right? He is more dangerous to us than this outside threat, right? Yeah.
Also, a bit like this, an external threat will try to get internal access anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like the guy who already has internal access. He already he already bypassed the hardest thing, which is to gain internal access in the first place, right? So yeah, and basically when he has internal access, he can move laterally. It's called lateral movement, moving within a network. It's also known as horizontal privilege escalation. When we say horizontal privilege escalation, means we're moving from one device to another device, right? And basically, yeah, that's why we should continuously monitor and control these zones, although they are implicitly trusted, but still we have certain monitoring security measures in place. Some examples of implicit trust zones that I mentioned: corporate office network, data center internal network, and VPN connections. Now, corporate office network and data center internal network, especially data centers, they have the highest security, right? So this is why we can determine that whoever is connected to our data center is implicitly trusted because of the various security checkpoints that he has to go through. But let's say, for example, VPN connections. Why do you think I put VPN connections? Yeah, so why do you use a VPN connection when you are in some like external place, maybe in another country, and you're trying to access company resources securely, right? So let's say this employee is trying to access the company resources, but not using VPN. Let's say using an insecure protocol, like for example, Telnet. That wouldn't be secure, right? Because as you know, Telnet, it transmits data in plain text, all right? So, but if we use VPN connections, regardless of the network that user is on, we can safely assume that he is implicitly trusted because he's using a secure VPN, right? And obviously, you guys know when we use a VPN, all of the data is encrypted using SSL TLS, and using, for example, like AES and all of the secure transmission protocols. Right? So these are implicit trust zones. Now the next one, this is covering it a bit, right? Yeah. Yeah. So moving on, we have subjects and systems, right? What is a subject and what is a system, right? So when we say subject, what do we mean? Yeah, user, device, process. Subjects that are trying to request access, or basically any device, any user, or any process. When we say process, I mean like a certain service that is running on the computer or a certain application that's running, right? Because at the end of the day, these are broken down into smaller processes, right? So these subjects whether their user, device, or process, are trying to request access to our corporate resources via systems. Now, obviously, you guys know information systems. So the desktops, laptops, iPhones, whatever, right? Android. So these subjects will use these systems to gain access to corporate resources. For example, a company employee can be recognized as a subject, right? Because he's a user, he's trying to gain access. And when we talk about systems, like I said, these are the devices that are used by the subjects to try to gain access to a resource, right? So, like I said, laptops or desktops or whatever, right? And basically, the subjects, they are the entities that are requesting access to these resources. Now, don't forget, we are talking about the data plane here. This is all data plane. Control plane is gone. خلاص. So the data plane, right, like we said, the entities will initiate these requests, connection requests, to gain to try to gain access to company resources. And now we come to probably the most important component in the data plane, right? Which is policy enforcement point. Now, when we say policy enforcement point, what do we mean? Exactly, PEP, policy enforcement point. What do you think? So when we say the word enforcement, what does it mean? To enforce the policies, to force, or to actually carry out the policies, right? Because like we mentioned previously, we have the policy engine, right? And we have the policy administrator that was in the control plane, right? Now we said the policy administrator is the one that implements. So why are we saying here that the policy enforcement point also implements? So who actually implements the actual action that was dictated by the policy engine, right? There is a contradiction here, right? Because, okay, so how does this work? We have the policy administrator, like we said, takes the action from the policy engine, and the policy administrator is the one that communicates with the policy enforcement point. So you can say both of them are linked together in a way, right? The policy enforcement will act as the security checkpoint. It will stop each connection. Then it will communicate with the policy administrator. The policy administrator will check with the policy engine. Okay, what is the specific decision? Should I allow him access? Should I deny him access? And then the policy engine communicates that decision back to the policy administrator. Policy administrator here communicates that decision to the policy enforcement point. The policy enforcement point, think of him as the security guard outside, for example. He's the one that will ultimately allow you to enter or not, right? He can disallow you from entering if he wants to. But it's not up to him, right? It's up to the senior management of UDST. They're the ones who dictate the policies. Who is allowed to access? You need to have a student ID. You need to be, like for example, faculty. You need to be registered. So these are the policies dictated by UDST. Think of these policies as the control plane, or as the policy engine and the policy administrator. Now the security guards, think of them as the policy enforcement point. They're the ones who actually, at the end of the day, perform the allow or deny action, right? And basically, the function of policy enforcement point, it will gather the data from these access requests. So we have a lot of devices requesting access to our network. It will gather all of the data from these requests. It will send all of these access request information to the policy engine, right? It will send it up to the control plane for a decision. And then when the control plane communicates the decision of allowing or denying access back to the policy enforcement point, it will enforce the actual access decision by allowing or blocking traffic. This is what the policy enforcement point does. So I hope that I made it clear. If you have any questions, let me know, please. I know these terms are a bit confusing, but inshallah, you guys understood it. Yes. Okay, why do we have policy engine and policy administrator? They can be coupled into one, right? They are. شوف, we have policy decision point. This is one component, right? One component. But within the policy decision point, we have the policy engine and the policy administrator. Now, why can we not combine policy engine and policy administrator? Because they're doing two separate functions in the first place.
Like the daily implementing.
Yes, yeah, the policy administrator, think of it as the network admin. Yeah, he's the guy who performs the day-to-day jobs, like you said, Ali. But the policy engine is the ultimate authority, the one who has access to the policies, the one who grants the actual decision based on the policies. So you cannot, okay, think of it this way. I have a very good example. You cannot let the network admin do the senior management tasks. You cannot let the network admin do his tasks and the senior management tasks, right? You cannot combine them into one guy. Same thing here. You cannot combine policy engine and policy administrator together because they're doing two separate things. But ultimately, both of them are part of policy decision point, right? It's part of a larger component. Yeah, and let me just go through this complete diagram real quick so you can understand everything and how these two how these two components of zero trust interact together, right? So let me show you. So yeah, so first of all, we have the subject over here. Okay. Oh my God. Just a moment. Okay. We have the subject, okay? And the subject is using a system. So let's say the subject is a user, okay? The user has a laptop or a desktop, which is the system, right? So the subject is using the certain device or a certain endpoint, which is considered untrusted, right? Because so far anything before the policy enforcement point is considered untrusted, right? Because we don't know who that user is. Is he actually a legitimate user? Is he a malicious user? So anything or any connection that reaches the policy enforcement point from outside is considered as untrusted, right? So when it reaches the policy enforcement point here, right? When it reaches it here, the policy enforcement point will stop that connection. It will communicate with the policy administrator. It will tell the policy administrator, please go and figure out what should I do with this connection. Should I allow it or should I deny it? Okay. And the policy administrator obviously is the network admin, right? He will not take the ultimate decision. The ultimate decision is with the senior management. And who's the senior management in this example? The policy engine. So the policy admin will communicate with the policy engine. It will tell him, okay, what is the ultimate decision? What should I do here? So I can communicate that decision back to the policy enforcement point. Okay, the policy engine will examine the context of the connection. It will see, okay, this connection is from the US. It's during this time of the day, and he has these certain permissions, right? And his credentials are correct. Maybe it will also verify the device's digital certificate to make sure that it is valid. So the policy engine will evaluate all of this criteria pertaining to the connection request, and then for example, let's say in this case that the policy engine will allow that connection. The connection criteria meets all of the stuff in the policy, right? The policy engine will tell the policy administrator, okay, you are allowed or communicate this certain allow action to the policy enforcement point. The policy admin will tell the policy enforcement point, okay, you are cleared to allow this connection to pass through and access the certain resource, right? Then the policy enforcement point will allow that connection to traverse through the network, and خلاص, as soon as this check is performed and is validated and he is allowed, he is in the trusted zone now, right? As soon as that connection is actually allowed to the network, that connection is considered part of the implicit trust zone. And then, yeah, خلاص, that certain subject can access whatever resource he was trying to access in the first place. Let's say like a database server or some sort of web server, right? This is how zero trust operates. You can see it is much more stricter, right? It's not the same as the traditional network, right? Because you see here, we have the trusted zone, and anything that is in the trusted zone is allowed access to certain resources. So yeah, do you have any questions, guys, so far? Is this does this diagram look intimidating as you saw it in the first place, or no? It's actually pretty easy, right? So I hope you guys understood everything. Now, just to conclude everything and to summarize what we talked about in this session. Zero trust. We have zero trust security model, and we have traditional based model, traditional based network security model. Zero trust, we said it relies on continuous identity verification. We are constantly authenticating each access attempt in our network and outside our network also. We are constantly verifying everything. You know, think of, I have a very nice example. Think of zero trust as someone who is paranoid, right? Certain paranoid guy, right? So like, for example, let's say that you live with your family and, you know, and you live in your house and you are someone who is paranoid. You know, you are always fearing that someone might break into your house or something. So this is what zero trust is. It's that paranoid guy, the guy who always validates everything, authenticates, verifies, locks the doors, locks the windows, right? This is zero trust. But, you know, and also, in a way, I know this is not entirely true, yani, with like most of us, but in a way, zero trust doesn't trust anyone in the network, doesn't trust anyone in the house, right? So zero trust is always paranoid. It doesn't trust anyone who is coming outside or anyone who is within the house also, right? So this is what zero trust is, if I were to compare it to a real life example. Also, we said that it takes into account the policy-driven access control, right? And also, we have strict monitoring as well. Like we said, zero trust is split into two components: control plane, which manages the whole rules and the policies and makes the actual decisions. So the control plane handles that. The data plane is the security guard, the security checkpoint, where it actually enforces whatever access decision was passed down. And therefore, since these access decisions are built upon access policies, in a way, the data plane is enforcing the access policies, right? So what do you call it? Data plane enforces everything at each connection point. Every single time that there is a connection, that there is a connection request to a certain resources, the entire process that I showed you earlier will occur every single time. Every single time there is a connection attempt, right? What's the goal? Why are we doing this? We are doing this to ensure only verified users and devices gain access to resources, right? We are disallowing malicious users, malicious devices, making sure that everyone who gains access is a good guy, okay? Which therefore reduces the risk from internal and external threats, right? Like we said, internal threats are the more dangerous threat. But this zero trust model will handle both threats, internal and external. Traditional based networks will only handle external threats, but will not handle internal threats, since it assumes by default that all the endpoints are trusted. So that was our session. Now let's move on to the 5 quick knowledge check questions. We have like 3 minutes. I might go over the 2 hour and 30-minute mark, but this shouldn't take long. So a network adopts a security model where it does not automatically trust any entity inside or outside its perimeter until verified. What is this approach known as? Zero trust. Easy question, yeah? This is like a warm-up question. Good. Yes. So it's zero trust. The correct answer is B. And like we said, the zero trust model operates on the principle of never trust, always verify. It's not automatically trusting any entity without verification, and regardless of their location in relation to the network's perimeter, right? So regardless of whether they are in the internal or external, we will not trust them by default. The control plane and data plane are components of network architecture, and policy administrator is a role in managing security policies. Question number 2. In a zero trust security model, what is the role of a policy engine? Let's see. Think about it. It's these are the kind of tricky questions that that will appear on the Security Plus. You think it's C? You think it's B? Okay. Discuss it between you.
You're right. Yeah.
It serves as the primary user authentication mechanism. So you guys agree on this? Are you sure? Why is it not B? But it also evaluates, right? But in a way it does, if you think about it. Okay, the policy enforcement point is the one that enforces. It's like in the name, right? But policy enforcement point will not necessarily enforce if it doesn't know what the access decision is.
It's the policy administrator that enforces. The policy engine makes the decision.
Makes the decision, yes. Yes, so when it makes... Okay, but okay. Let's read B for a second, okay? Evaluates and enforces security policies. Security policies.
So, security, and you have the policies. You have
Yeah.
someone in front of you, and you
Yeah.
evaluate, is this guy allowed by this policy or not?
Allowed
You
or not.
enforce it. So B is the, forget, BEB, not the billion.
Yeah, so because we said the policy engine, right? What does it do? It has the access policies and it evaluates the connections based on the policies, right? Okay, now you guys were confused because it says enforces security policies. Now it's true, it doesn't enforce security policies. That's the job of the policy enforcement point, right? It's the one that actually stops the connection. But policy enforcement point will enforce the action, right? But in a way, policy engine does enforce the policy, the access policy. Are you trying to get what I'm saying? Or it's a bit of a gray area. I do agree with you. It's a bit of a gray area. But in a way, when we're talking about security policies, not the action, we can safely assume that policy engines does in fact enforce the security policy, but it doesn't enforce the action. It's not the one that stops the connection or the one that allows the connection. It's the one that is in charge of making sure that the connection adheres to the access policy.
So policy engine basically tells the administrator, start the new session, these are the policies.
Yep.
And then the administrator's like, all right, we've got this session, I'm managing this session, I'm gonna
Yes.
send this guy out to enforce it.
Policy enforcement. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think I understand.
Exactly. Policy, just to put it simply, policy enforcement point carries out the action. Policy engine is the one that carries out the policy. It's the one that carries out the company policy, right?
Yeah.
So, see, yeah. Maybe the word is a bit misleading. I agree with you. But yeah, but also don't forget about the second part of B, which is determine access rights.
What I spoke to first.
Exactly. And when we say C, it says it serves as the primary user authentication mechanism. Like, that's not really correct, right?
Yeah, because that basically be the entire system, not just the one thing.
Yeah, exactly. And we can also argue that it's the policy enforcement point in a way, because you know why? Because actually the policy enforcement point we said is the one that gathers all of the connection data, right? So where he's connecting from, what time, right? So in a way, the one who carries out the user authentication is the policy enforcement point.
You switch between primary.
Yeah, it's a bit of a misleading question, to be honest. But in the Security Plus, they have these certain questions, by the way, where you look in any multiple choice question, not just in Security Plus, you will have two questions that are very close, right? And it's one of them. But one of them is truer than the other. Both of them might be true, by the way, but one of them is truer than the other, right? So yeah. Policy engine evaluates requests against the security policies within a zero trust architecture. It determines access by considering various factors such as the user's identity, his role, and the context of the request. Other answers refer to unrelated or incorrectly defined components, right? Three more questions left. Question 3, which of the following best describes the concept of adaptive identity in zero trust? Let's see if Ali can maybe answer this one. يلا Ali. A system that adjusts the verification process based on factors like location, behavior, and device security. What do you think, guys? You said it could be D?
Well, B is like, can be true. As you said earlier, B is more true to the question. than
Yes.
C.
Exactly. See what I mean? They are confusing, right? But that one, yes. But yeah, like you said, yeah, exactly. It's a system that adjusts the verification process based on factors like location, behavior, and yeah. So the keyword is adjusts the verification, and yeah, enforce. That question was a bit, but here it's clear. It adjusts the verification process based on factors. So yes, actually, Ali, you are correct. Yes, it is B actually. Adaptive identity focuses on dynamically adjusting the authentication process based on the context of the user's request. So like we said, if the user is connecting from some unknown country, that's where we usually don't receive connections from, it's going to prompt that connection or prompt that user to provide additional verification steps. Yeah. Based on the context, this includes factors like the user's location, device, or behavior patterns, helping to strengthen security where needed. Yep. Question 4. Which of the following is an example of an implicit trust zone in a zero trust model? So which one of these 4 is an implicit trust zone or can be considered as an implicit trust zone? A network segment within a corporate office that assumes traffic is safe because of physical security controls in place. Now, what does A say? Corporate employee logging in from personal device without any additional security checks. Obviously, this is wrong. A is wrong, right? It's not someone logging in, like that has nothing to do. C is wrong because we're saying an external partner trying to access the company's internal network via an unencrypted connection. That would never be classified as an implicit trust zone. Never, right? A user accessing a cloud service from an unverified public Wi-Fi network. That would obviously be considered untrusted. So yeah, B. A network segment within a corporate office that assumes traffic is safe because of physical security control. So implicit trust zones refer to areas within a network that are assumed to be trusted, often due to physical security measures or predefined trust settings. Option B is an example, as traffic within a corporate office is assumed to be more trustworthy due to the physical access controls, like we mentioned, like the biometrics and like RFID. Other options represent scenarios that would require further verification. Last question, guys. In a zero trust model, what is the primary function of the policy enforcement point? This will help reinforce the concept of policy enforcement and policy admin and policy engines. You guys can know the difference. To enforce access decisions by controlling whether or not communication is allowed between subjects and resources. I think I agree with you also. Yes. Yes. See, now...
Somewhat there, need more of a clearer answer.
Yeah, because actually data plane, it does monitor and log all traffic. But like I said, me personally, I was conflicted between B and D. B because it says evaluates the identity of users and grant or deny access. But obviously that's the job of the policy engine, right? Not
Not evaluate, but it will gather data.
Yes.
Not the same as evaluate.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then granting or denying it only listens to the higher up to do that.
Exactly. So it enforces access decisions by controlling whether or not communication is allowed between the subject and the resource that the subject is trying to access. The policy enforcement point is responsible for enforcing the access decision made by the policy engine. It controls whether or not a subject, such as a user or system, can access a particular resource. It acts as a gatekeeper, similar to the security guard, that ensures the security policies are applied in real time. The other options describe different components, such as policy management or monitoring. But the PEP's role is specifically to enforce the decisions. And that's it. Thank you so much, guys. Do you have any questions before we leave? Was zero trust completely good? Did you guys understand everything? Yeah? It was one of the more challenging topics, right? It's just the terminology actually that is a bit confusing. But alhamdulillah, you guys understood it, and thank you once again for coming. See you in the next session, inshallah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.